I think this is the common objection to, let's say, religious faith or the concern about faith in general, is that it somehow contradicts science and reason. And I think particularly with the Roman Catholic Church, I think there is a common misunderstanding that the church has somehow been regressive, has rejected the advances of science, or has persecuted Galileo, persecuted those that were seeing advancements in that space. So you mentioned a priest who really actually schooled Einstein as an example, but give us more your take on the church's engagement and development of the sciences over the last several centuries.
Sure. Well, just to start off with, it used to be the case that there was more or less an even split between scientists who were theists, believers in God, versus scientists who are agnostics and atheists. Today, however, 51% of scientists overall declare, according to the last Pew survey, declare themselves to be believers in God or a higher transcendent power. Only 21% declare themselves to be agnostic, and 20% declare themselves to be atheists. So the idea that most scientists are atheists is just simply false. What's more interesting is among young scientists today, that's 35 years or younger, 66% of those young scientists declare themselves to be believers in God or a higher transcendent power. And the reason for that is pretty clear, because the evidence is now, which we'll talk a little bit about today, is overwhelming in favor of God. It's much harder to be an atheist today than ever before in the history of both faith and science. And by the way, only about 15% of young scientists declare themselves to be agnostics, and about 15% atheists. Among medical doctors, it's really differentiated. 76% of doctors declare themselves to be believers in God or a higher transcendent power. Only 12.1% declare themselves to be agnostics. 11.5% declare themselves to be atheists. And then if you look at the percentage of doctors who believe in miracles, 74% of doctors believe in miracles, both past and present. And the reason is clear, because they see the miracles in their own practice.
Wow.
I mean, doctors have told me, every 2 months I see something that's completely naturalistically inexplicable. I mean, I can't possibly be an atheist.
Is it connected to prayer or connected to the faith of the patient or their family?
Absolutely. It's absolutely connected to prayer. There's very good articles by Dr. Harold Koenig at Duke University Medical School, and he and his team have put together a series of studies that show that prayer not only has a beneficent effect in emotional health, right? So people's well-being emotionally, but there we know there's a 3 to 4 times increase in a sense of well-being, or we could look at the opposite direction. Those who are non-religiously affiliated have a 4 times increase in depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, suicides. So we know religion and prayer are really important for emotional health. But what Koenig is showing in his studies is it also has a radically good effect on physical health.
Wow.
And by the way, all of his articles, that's Koenig, all those articles are free of charge right on the internet. So just look up Dr. Harold Koenig, Duke University Studies in Medicine and Faith. You'll see it. So there is that going on. But back to the Catholic Church, there's a wonderful little Wikipedia article called Catholic Clerics in Science, or maybe it's now Catholic Clergy Scientists is the name of the wiki article, Catholic Clergy. There they show that well over 200 priests now, were involved, Catholic priests were involved in the development of science. I mean, first of all, Roger Bacon, I don't have to say anything more about that. He's a monk, Franciscan monk, but of course was the founder of scientific methodology. Nicholas Copernicus, well, he was a Catholic cleric. He wasn't a priest, but he was responsible for the Copernican revolution. Remember remember the whole Galileo affair was about heliocentrism, right? The sun being at the center of the solar system and planets revolving around the sun. And the Catholic Church was certainly not against heliocentrism. After all, the first person to articulate mathematically and justify mathematically the possibility of heliocentrism was a Catholic cleric named Nicholas Copernicus, who basically even had a canon law degree as well. So very ensconced in faith, very ensconced in Catholic Church. But of course, one of the reason he's Copernican revolution, is he was the guy who took the first step, in heliocentrism. Furthermore, I think people recognize the name Gregor Mendel, the father of quantitative genetics. He was an Augustinian monk and abbot. You take a look at Nicholas Steno. Nicholas Steno was the father of what we call a contemporary stratigraphy. That's the geological evaluation of stratification of the Earth's core, its crust, and so forth. So all of these things. He was, by the way, a Catholic bishop, Danish bishop. There, as I just said, Father Georges Lemaitre is the father of the Big Bang theory. Now, that's the most comprehensive, rigorously established theory that unifies all of our cosmology and physics and astrophysics today. That was a Catholic priest, and as I said, acknowledged by Einstein to have been the first person to have discovered it. And by the way, if you look at that article in the Wikipedia, you can see 200 other Catholic priests who are instrumental. By the way, the Catholic Church, the Jesuits specifically, controlled seismological laboratories all over the world for over a century. If you wanted to know what was going on scientifically from a geological perspective, earthquakes, et cetera, Earth movement, et cetera, tectonic plate, you just consulted a Catholic priest. They were the guys at the head of the thing. So the idea that the Catholic Church is somehow antithetical to science is pretty laughable. They were involved in science from the very beginning, and the Galileo affair was not about heliocentrism or even the Church's rejection of a scientific theory. It was all about the rules of publication during that time. And basically, the Pope said to Galileo, this is very controversial. We're getting our chops busted here by a lot of people, not just the Catholic faithful, but Protestant faithful as well, are very concerned about this thought that maybe heliocentrism contradicts the Bible. So let's back off on this until we have positive proof from stellar parallax that it is, in fact, the case. You can't just leap from the lunar orbits around Jupiter. You can't leap then to a heliocentric view of the solar system without factual verification through stellar parallax. That's a technique that you can use to verify that for sure. The only explanation is that the planets are orbiting around the sun rather than the sun and the other planets orbiting around the Earth. That was called geocentrism. But the key point is the Pope just asked him, hold off on the publication. It was Galileo who said, I don't think I'm going to do that. I'm going to publish this as fact. And then, of course, he kind of ridicules the Pope as being a fool in his dialogue, and the Pope said, "Man, this is way beyond the pale here. You're acting like something that is not a fact, established fact yet, is really the truth." There was a very fine Jesuit by the name of Saint Robert Bellarmine, and Bellarmine 10 years earlier, before the whole controversy, I'm convinced that if Bellarmine had been alive, the controversy would have never happened. But Bellarmine actually told his friend Foscarini, he said, look, and we now call that Bellarmine's principle today, but he said, look, if you can give me a scientific demonstration that in fact the Earth is orbiting around the sun, then no problem. It's up to us as Scripture scholars to find an interpretation of Scripture that does not conflict with the scientific fact. But to my mind, such a demonstration does not exist yet. And of course, it didn't exist until Bessel came along, almost 200 years later, and established through stellar parallax, that heliocentrism was indeed the case. So, it wasn't about the Catholic Church rejecting science. Catholic Church would never have done anything like that. The Catholic Church would certainly have been open to it. And Bellarmine, as he said, hey, if you can give me a scientific demonstration, establishes the facticity of this, I'm all over it. But you don't have one, Galileo. Then when he published that thing, then that's when the Pope got upset and said, hey, you broke your promise, et cetera, et cetera.
So it wasn't that it might in some way endanger Scripture. It was more that we want more proof, and we need to, there was a high standard that they had for new theories that would being kind of expounded upon, especially in a culture where, the papacy had an outsized impact, both politically and culturally. I think people don't realize that today, because today's papacy has some impact politically, but nothing close to what it did in the last, few hundred years of Western civilization.